Hey family, welcome to this week's minisode. We're going to get started with talking a little bit about the history of leadership. If you're hearing all this culture talk and want to be a part of a thriving, growing culture, we want to invite you to be a part of Squeeze In.
Squeeze In Franchising offers you the chance to bring a culture and a vibe like Squeeze In to your community. You can make money, you can get time freedom for you and your family. We would love to have you as part of our Squeeze In family.
Join us in the ownership team and go to squeezein.com/franchising.
You're enjoying this episode on Angel Phoenix Productions Podcast Network. To explore a complete lineup of quality programs and media production services, head on over to angelphoenix.com or like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Angel Phoenix Productions.
Leadership, for the most part, historically speaking, for the vast amount of human history, has not meant what it means now as we understand leadership in this kind of organizational context and servant leader and all of these dimensions and qualities like we like to talk about and so many of us ascribe to and aspire to be like. For most of history, leadership was kind of brutal, like battlefield, dominating, kings and queens, like royalty. Like leadership meant the person in charge, and they would use coercion and power and force to get done what their will was, and there was no balance or power or anything like that.
You know, the vernacular around servant leadership really didn't get popularized until the late 70s, early 80s is when we start seeing it pop up primarily in university texts and things. It didn't really make its way into organizational culture until the early 2000s. So we're really talking about servant leadership being the number one way of doing things, really only arising in this last couple of decades. Before that, there was only one servant leader, and it was so radical. We studied it for like 2,000 years.
Right? You would think people were like, wow, Jesus led in this really innovative way. Like, let's emulate that a little bit more.
Nope. It's war, brutality.
Well, you know, humans be humaning, and despite our humanness, we continue to evolve socially in some ways that are pretty impressive, not just on the battlefield and through kind of the governments of dictatorships and royalty and those kinds of things, but leadership often was life or death in terms of standing up for social rights, right? Like you think about the civil rights and the suffragist movements and the labor movements, like there were a lot of really powerful, impactful leaders through human rights groups and movements through history that have literally put their lives on the line in order to make a difference in that movement.
And put their lives on the line and lost their lives to those movements. You know, one example of this in action is Harry T. Moore. Well, he was an educator and civil rights activist, and he was the founder of the NAACP chapter in Brevard County, Florida. Now, he's recognized for single-handedly increasing the number of NAACP members in Florida and for helping thousands of African Americans register to vote in the 1940s. He's also investigated lynchings, filed lawsuits against voter registration barriers and white primaries, and worked for equal pay for Black teachers in public schools, although they were segregated. Now, he was also one of the very first civil rights leaders to be killed by the opposition when a bomb was put underneath his home on Christmas Eve of 1951. Him and his wife were both killed for the cause that they stood for.
Harry Moore is immortalized in a poem by Langston Hughes, a sad and deep poem about the loss on that Christmas Eve and the good that this man did during the civil rights movement. It's just one example of so many unsung heroes. Like we all know MLK, right? Like we all know Gandhi, but there are hundreds and thousands of other people who have demonstrated this brave leadership and had the courage to put their life on the line for something they believe in. People like Sophie Scholl and the White Rose movement, really interesting story to hear here. In 1942, Hans Scholl, a German medical student at the University of Munich, founded the White Rose movement with some of his fellow students. Among the White Rose members was his younger sister. This movement was one of the few German groups that spoke out against Nazi genocidal policies. Now, at great risk, the members distributed pamphlets, spoke out against the regime, and risked their lives, ultimately losing their lives. All of them did. And Sophie being just 21 years old at the time, but for standing up for what they believed was causes, right? And leading a cause, even when they knew it was probably a losing cause for them.
Being only 21 when she passed, I think Sophie shows us that, right, you're never too young or too small to get up and stand for what you believe in. And this was, traditionally, this is how leadership goes, right? You're an outlier and you stand up for what you believe in, or you're in a position of power and you're a leader by position. But these people literally laid down their lives for the things that they believed in. And I think it's such a beautiful example of leadership, even if it's something that might not be super relevant in today's society.
It helps me orient my perspective when I get a little complainy and whiny about some of my duties and tasks as a leader these days. It's nothing life-threatening. For our restaurant business, we like to say it's just bacon and eggs. In our other businesses, it's just personal growth and development, right? It's not, risking our lives for these causes. But I'm so grateful. There have been so many wonderful leaders, both sung and unsung, throughout history who have helped blaze the trail for today's society where we can understand leadership as we do now.
Now, we talked about leadership in the past. Tomorrow, let's talk a little bit more about leadership in the present. And you're going to hear some personal stories from Shyla and I about leadership in our lives.
See you then.
This podcast was a production of Angel Phoenix Productions. Explore more episodes of this show or other great shows on the Angel Phoenix Podcast Network by visiting angelphoenix.com. The views expressed in this show do not necessarily represent those of Angel Phoenix Productions or its advertisers and may contain language that's unsuitable for younger listeners.